Hi, and welcome to my channel, knottygnome Crafts. My name is Sarah, and you can find me as knottygnome on Instagram. In today's video, I'm going to share with you 10 tips to save money on garment sewing. Now, we all know because of inflation, our dollars are not going as far these days, and so a lot of us may be looking to save some money on our hobby. But even if you aren't necessarily looking to save money, I feel like many of these tips go hand in hand with other goals like sustainability or practicing minimalism. So I'm hoping that there will be something for everyone, that you might be able to take something away from these tips that I'm going to give you, even if you're not strictly looking to spend less money on your sewing. I'm also really trying to bring you some tips that are beyond the obvious. We all know about free patterns, we all love free patterns, we all use free patterns. Definitely use free patterns, but these are 10 additional tips that I'm hoping that will be a little bit different, and maybe a few that you haven't heard before that you might be able to incorporate into your own practice. Tip number 1 is to buy patterns that have options. And there's two different things that I mean by this. The first is, if you purchase Big Four patterns, look for the wardrobe patterns that have multiple types of garments all in one envelope. It's often like an entire outfit that you can make for yourself. Now, don't buy the wardrobe pattern if there's only one thing that you like in it. If you only want to make the jacket, then it's a waste to buy that pattern. But if you really do like multiple garments that are in the envelope and you would think that you would make them, that could be a really good value where you could just buy the pattern once but make it over and over again. The second part of this applies to both Big Four and indie patterns, and that is to look for patterns that have multiple views. Pattern Emporium is a company that is particularly good at this. They often give you so many different options that you can make multiple garments that don't even look like you've made it with the same pattern. So that is another way that you can spend your money once on a pattern and maximize your dollars and get lots of use out of it. By the way, I'm not affiliated with Pattern Emporium. I've just purchased a lot of their patterns and been very happy with them. I just thought they were a good example to use for this tip. Tip number 2 is kind of another two-parter, and that is to borrow books from your local library. Pattern books can be a really good way to get value for your money, because if you want to make several projects from the book, you can just buy the book once and then you have all these projects. But books can actually be quite expensive. So I highly recommend, especially if it's a book that you're not sure about, to try to borrow it from your local library. Depending on your library system, even if the library doesn't have it, they might be able to purchase the book for you, or you may be able to borrow it through interlibrary loan. But I just think it's a really great way to kind of preview pattern books, see what you like. And then if you decided that you do like the book and that you would make multiple things from it, I highly encourage you to try to obtain the book used. I've bought a lot of used craft books over the years. They are much, much less expensive than buying them new. And, sometimes maybe the covers are a little dinged up or something, but that doesn't really bother me as long as the contents are intact. And it can be a really good way to buy those pattern books, which can be quite expensive, at a discount. Tip number 3 is to reuse patterns that you already own. Now, there's the obvious benefit that when you use patterns multiple times, you're getting a lower cost per use, and that's really great because patterns can be really expensive. Sometimes they can be as much as $20, and if you make a pattern twice, then it's only $10 per use as opposed to that $20 for just once. But in addition to that, I feel like there's actually a psychological benefit to reusing patterns. So sometimes, like let's say that, I've made a couple of projects in a row that haven't really worked out and I'm starting to lose my sojo, kind of not feeling it. And a lot of times what I will do to perk myself back up again is that I'll go to my favorite fabric shop and I'll buy some fabric, or I'll buy a new pattern, and that will get me excited about sewing again. But instead of doing that, consider making a pattern that you've made before, because you're much more likely to get an easy win from it. You've already put in the legwork of like prepping the pattern and fitting it, and you've already gone through the steps of sewing it before. So you're much more likely to get a finished project that gives you that satisfaction, that's truly a win. And that might be able to perk up your sojo again rather than spending money. So maybe you're someone who is already really good about reusing their patterns over and over, and this tip won't be that helpful to you, but it's definitely something that I could take some use from and use more often. I'm really bad about not making my patterns once I've made them, but I do think that it is a good way to get that sense of satisfaction and also save yourself some money. Tip number 4 is about shopping. When you are fabric shopping or pattern shopping, I like to add to my cart and save it and then wait for a sale. And if your particular site doesn't have a way to save your cart, sometimes you can add things to a Pinterest board and just keep it for when you need it, and you can go back and revisit and just check and see if it's on sale. Now, the reason I think that this is a really good way to save money is that sometimes when I go fabric shopping, I do a lot of fabric shopping online, and I will add things to my cart because I'm looking for something because I was inspired, and then maybe a few weeks later, like I've completely forgotten about what I even wanted this fabric for, I don't like it anymore, or I've just changed my mind. So it's a really good way to sort of pause and just make sure that you really want something. And then obviously by waiting until it's on sale, then you're saving a little bit of money. Now, clearly, there will be times when you do that the fabric will sell out and you won't be able to get it anymore. But to that, I say there will always be more fabric. Yes, it's disappointing sometimes when something that you wanted is no longer available. I guarantee you that there will be something else that will come along that will grab your heart and make you feel just as happy. So don't worry so much about, I have to get this before it's gone. Now, I'm as guilty of this as anybody else, but I do think that I'm speaking to myself as well as all of you, that it's okay to wait for the sale. And if it's gone when you go to get it, then it just wasn't meant to be and you can find something else. Tip number 5 might seem a bit counterintuitive, and that is to buy for just one project at a time. Now, I can hear you guys talking to the screen, but if I only buy for one project at a time, then I'm wasting shipping costs or I'm not buying things on sale. And yes, that is true. But by buying for only one project at a time, then you're only buying the supplies for what you're immediately going to make, and there's no waste. So I, again, am as guilty of this as anybody, of like going to the sales and just picking up all the stuff that I've had my eye on. And then, a few months down the road, I do change my mind, or I decide that I don't like the fabric anymore, or I decide that I don't want to make that pattern anymore, that I saw it on someone else and it looked great on them, but it's not really right for me. And by buying things when they're on sale and then hanging on to them, it ends up sometimes just being a waste. Like it's just taking up space in your fabric stash, or it's on your computer drive taking up file space, and you're never actually going to make it. So if you stick to just buying for one project at a time, even if you are paying those high shipping costs, even if you're not buying stuff on sale, you know that you're actually going to make that thing, and therefore it's not wasteful. I know that this tip works because I have implemented it at times in my life, and I did save more money overall than I do in my normal practice of just buying enough to get the free shipping, that kind of thing. In the end, you really don't save money doing that. If you are finding these tips helpful so far, I would really appreciate it if you would hit the thumbs up, because it signals to YouTube to send my video out to more viewers. Thank you so much for helping my channel grow. Tip number 6 is try to come up with creative or fun ways to use what you already have. Now, we are very, very lucky in the sewing community that every single month there are always really fun sewing challenges that you can participate in. That is one way that you can, get creative, dig through your own stash, through your own patterns, and come up with ways that you can participate in the community without spending money. You can also just make it a personal challenge. Maybe you're not into sharing things on Instagram, but you just want to say to yourself, before I buy anything else, I want to get through 10 pieces of fabric, or whatever it is that helps to motivate you. Just try to come up with ways to get yourself going, make it fun, to use what you already have rather than buying something new. Tip number 7 is to find fun ways to use your scraps. Now, I know that there are tons and tons of videos and information out there of things that you can use for scrap busters. My problem with those kinds of things is that a lot of them involve projects that I just am not interested in ever making. Things like scrunchies or like home decor, or there's just a lot of stuff that I'm like, I don't want to make that, or bags. Like I hate making bags. But you just need to find the scrap busting project that speaks to you, because there are a wide variety of things that you can do with scraps. Surely at least one or two of those ideas are something that will apply to your own life. An example of things that I feel like I could use to bust my scraps are, I am interested in making something like a quilted jacket that could use up scraps. I've also really liked a lot of the color blocked garments that I've seen on Instagram. And in fact, I actually made a color blocked Cali shirt out of some double gauze that I had left over from other projects, and I really enjoyed making that. And recently I've become interested in using up my scraps to make underwear. Now I have to say that making underwear, it was never my dream to sew my own underwear, but I do think that it's a really nice way to use up those really small leftover bits of jersey scraps. So I am currently looking for a pattern that will work for me, that I could reuse to make over and over, and just kind of keep it on my table nearby when I'm cutting anything out of cotton jersey, that I could use up those scraps and get them out of my stash. And so the point of the scrap buster part is just to find a project that really works for you in your life. Maybe you make things for a lot of gifts for people, or maybe you do charity work. Just find a way to use up those scraps in a way that makes sense for you and your life, and then do it, because we all have scraps. It's a problem for all of us. It is a way to use up those scraps that we aren't using for anything else, and then to make it into something useful and beautiful in the world. Now, tip number 8 is one that I recommend to more experienced sewists. I specifically do not recommend this tip if you are a beginner, and that is to buy supplies that you use a lot in bulk. Now, the reason that I do not recommend this for beginners is because you're a beginner and you don't know what supplies you're going to use a lot. And so I know this because I have done it myself many, many times, of like, oh yeah, I'll use that, and so I'll buy a giant thing of it, and then 20 years later I still have that thing because I didn't actually need that. But definitely things that you might use a lot that would be a good idea to buy in bulk are things like elastic. I make a lot of elastic waist garments these days, and so it makes sense for me to buy the larger rolls and have them on hand. Things like thread, if you are the kind of person who doesn't necessarily need to match every single project perfectly with your thread color. I kind of go back and forth on that. Sometimes I'm particular about it, but other times I'll just use whatever neutral thread that I have on hand that's close enough, or that's closest in color to whatever I'm making. I will go ahead and buy those colors in bulk, like black, white, gray, beige, those kinds of colors. You know, there's lots of things that you can buy in bulk if you use them a lot. Like, I have bought shirt buttons in neutral colors that I know that I will end up using a lot, just kind of plain ones. I'll buy those in bulk. If you use a lot of zippers, you could buy those. There's just a lot of different notions that are cheaper to buy them in larger quantities, but only do that if it's something that you use a lot and you know that it's good to have it on hand. Now, some places that are good to find things like that are places like Wawak. Sewing machine needles is another one that's really good to buy in bulk. For the sizes that I use the most, I'll just get like a 10-pack. So Wawak is a really good place, and also Amazon, although the quality of Amazon can be iffy, so I recommend, again, having a little bit more experience if you're going to buy from Amazon. But yeah, I do think that that is a good way to save money, but as long as you know what you actually use. Tip number 9 is, when you are sewing a garment, to adapt your notions to use what you have on hand. Now, what I mean by that is, if let's say that your pattern calls for a hook and eye, and you don't have a hook and eye, but you do have a button, and you could change it to like a button and a loop closure. Or, your pattern calls for buttons, but you only have snaps. Or the pattern calls for a certain size of elastic, but you have a different size of elastic that's very similar, but just a little bit shorter. You could adapt your pattern to fit the elastic that you have on hand. Just find little ways that you can use the notions that you already have in your stash, so you don't have to go out and buy something new. Because, I think we've all been there. Like, sometimes when you go out to Joann's and you're trying to buy your notions for one project, if you're doing that one at a time, it does get expensive. So if you are like me and you have bought those notions in bulk and you have a bunch of things already in your stash, just find ways to use them in the projects that you have, rather than having to buy something individually new every single time. And tip number 10, I think, is a really good one for our times, because matching sets are so incredibly popular right now. If you buy a cut of fabric and you're planning to make multiple garments from that one piece of fabric, I highly encourage you to cut all of your garments out at the same time. And that is because you can really maximize your fabric use by laying out all of the pattern pieces that you're going to use at once, and it's going to save you more fabric, rather than, say, if you're making a top and a skirt. If you cut out the top and then later you cut out the skirt, it's going to waste more fabric than if you cut out both of them at the same time. So, like, for an example, if you have a skirt piece that's like kind of slim and long, and then you have all of this section up here, maybe there's not you can't fit the other skirt piece on here, but you could fit some of the top pieces on there. And it's just a way to utilize your fabric. In the end, you end up using less yardage than you would if you cut out each pattern separately. So I hope that at least a few of these tips spoke to you. Please let me know in the comments what your money saving tips are. I'm sure that we all have wisdom to share, and it would be really great to hear other people's tips on how you save money on garment sewing. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to watch this one, which is all about my top tips for assembling those PDF patterns in a way that doesn't want to make you tear your hair out. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next time.